Palestinians were hurt in clashes with Israeli police. Israel celebrated Jerusalem Day today, marking its capture of eastern sections of the holy city. In the 1967 Arab-Israeli war, violence erupted around the Aqsa mosque, which is one of the most sensitive sites in Jerusalem. The Palestinian Red Crescent Society said more than 300 Palestinians were injured when Israeli police fired stun grenades and rubber bullets at them. According to Israel, at least 45 rockets were fired from Gaza. Israel said it had carried out an airstrike in northern Gaza against Hamas militants and was looking into reports that children were killed. The United Nations Security Council will convene a closed session on Monday as the Secretary General expresses his deep concern over the continuing violence in occupied East Jerusalem, as well as the possible evictions of Palestinian families from their homes in Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan neighborhoods. Among the major flashpoints has been the Aqsa Mosque, Temple Mount compound, sacred to both Islam and Judaism. In a statement, António Guterres addressed the latest calls and tensions, urging Israel to cease demolitions and evictions of Palestinian homes in line with its obligations under international humanitarian and international human rights law. Sharon Bryce-Pease reports from New York. So, Sharon, the United Nations Security Council meeting behind closed doors, what is the latest of and from that meeting?
Yeah, that meeting happening, as you correctly point out, Tsepiso, behind closed doors. So difficult for us to tell you exactly what was said in that meeting. So we get a little bit, a few anecdotes from diplomats post the meeting. We understand that they are in discussion to release possibly a statement later today. We are, though, hearing from members of the council that the United States has said that it might not be quite as useful to issue a statement right now because they are working behind the scenes to calm the situation. They say that if there were to be a statement, Tsepiso, forthcoming from the council, it's expected to echo statements we heard from the Secretary General over the weekend and from the from the Middle East Quartet, made up of the European Union, the United Nations, the United States and Russia. What they said over the weekend is that they're alarmed by the provocative statements made by some political groups, as well as the launching of rockets and the resumption of incendiary balloons from Gaza towards Israel. The envoys noted with serious concern the possible evictions of Palestinian families from homes that they've lived in for generations, very much at the heart of the current dispute. The High Commissioner for Human Rights spokesperson, Rupert Colville, weighing in from Geneva, this is what he said.
Given the disturbing scenes in Sheikh Jarrah over the past few days, we wish to emphasize that East Jerusalem remains part of the occupied Palestinian territory in which international humanitarian law applies. The occupying power must respect and cannot confiscate private property in occupied territory, and must respect, unless absolutely prevented, the laws in force in the country. This means that Israel cannot impose its own set of laws in occupied territory, including East Jerusalem, to evict Palestinians from their homes. In practice, the implementation of these laws facilitates the transfer by Israel of its population into occupied East Jerusalem. And the transfer of parts of an occupying power's civilian population into the territory that it occupies is prohibited under international humanitarian law and may amount to a war crime.
So very much an issue about possible demolition, possible eviction of Palestinian families from that East Jerusalem neighborhood. Tsepiso, the Secretary General expressing deep concern over the continuing violence. And as we watch this situation closely, we are getting reports from the region that we are on the verge of a possible major escalation here, a really circular issue as we return now to heightened tensions between Palestinians and the Israelis once again.
So let's just then put it into context, Sherwin. What is at the heart of the current flare-up that we're seeing in the region, particularly around East Jerusalem and the Al-Aqsa Mosque?
Well, part of the macro issues here are questions around Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank, the demolition of Palestinian homes, the eviction of Palestinians from certain territories in East Jerusalem and the occupied West Bank. That's the macro issue. The micro issue was that the Israeli Supreme Court was supposed to hand down judgment earlier Monday on whether to uphold a court order evicting 6 Palestinian families from the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah in East Jerusalem. The history of Sheikh Jarrah is that in the late 1800s, 1876, Jewish trusts purchased this land from Arab owners of the land. This was lost to Jordan at the end of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, where this parcel of land was then given to 28 Palestinian families. Of course, the subsequent 1967 war, the Six-Day War, where Israel won that war and retook parts of East Jerusalem, and essentially this territory that is in dispute here. And it was also something addressed by Rupert Colville of the High Commission for Human Rights. Let's watch.
According to several Security Council resolutions, all legislative and administrative measures and actions taken by Israel, the occupying power, which have altered or purport to alter the character and status of East Jerusalem, including expropriation of land and properties, are null and void and must be rescinded. So we call on Israel to immediately halt all forced evictions, including those in Sheikh Jarrah, and to cease any activity that would further contribute to a coercive environment and lead to a risk of forcible transfer. We further call on Israel to respect freedom of expression and assembly, including of those who are protesting against the evictions, and to exercise maximum restraint in the use of force while ensuring safety and security in East Jerusalem.
So very much at the heart of this Tsepiso is concerns, particularly in the international community, but also within Palestine, that Israel is seeking to alter the character of parts of East Jerusalem, parts of the West Bank, that Palestinians are seeking for a future independent Palestinian state, including with its capital at East Jerusalem.
Sharon, obviously, the concern continues about the protests and the hundreds of injuries that we've seen on the Palestinian side and in some instances on the Israeli side. But just looking at the situation, what is driving concern that there could be an escalation of violence, especially as we're hearing reports now of rocket fire from the Gaza Strip into Israel?
Yeah, you nail it at the end there, Tsepiso. It is the rocket fire that Hamas is claiming responsibility for. They say this is in retribution for the over 300 Palestinians that have been injured in clashes at the Temple Mount, at the Aqsa mosque compound. We also understand that some 21 Israeli police officers have also been injured. And we also understand that rocket fire sirens have been going off in Jerusalem due to concerns of these trajectories that are being fired in from Gaza. The Secretary General just weighing in specifically a short time ago on the rocket fire. He said that he's following with deep concern the latest security developments, which risk triggering yet another dangerous escalation, leading to further violence and loss of life. He condemns in the strongest terms the launching of rockets from Gaza into Israel, which have been reportedly claimed by Hamas, including the targeting of civilian population centers. He urges all parties to exercise maximum restraint. And I think that's what the global community is looking to the Security Council in terms of any statement that might or might not be forthcoming. They need the international community to weigh in here in order to de-escalate the current tensions, because as we have seen in the past, we are on the verge of a huge escalation here, and we don't know where that might lead.
Sharon Bryce-Pease, my colleague out there in New York at the United Nations, where a closed-door meeting is being held around this situation. Of course, he'll have more later on.